The great ship glided silently through the endless stretch of stars, its hull gleaming under the pale light of distant suns. Humanity had long dreamed of this moment, and now it had arrived. Lyra Vance stood near the observation window, her hands clasped lightly, watching the alien worlds drift past. She had trained for years to be here, yet nothing could have prepared her for the reality of stepping into the heart of the Xenarch Empire, a civilization older than human memory, ruled by Empress Kalara, whose name alone carried weight across star systems. Lyra could feel her heartbeat, steady but alive with anticipation. The mission was clear. She was to represent humanity at the court of the Empress, to show that humans were not merely primitive wanderers in space, but beings of intellect, emotion, and subtle strength. She had studied the Xenarchs for months, their history, their rituals, their unbending dedication to logic and order. And yet, she knew that no book, no simulation, could teach her what it truly meant to face a being who had ruled for centuries without laughter, without fear, without wonder. The ship shuddered lightly as it entered orbit around the throne world. Below them stretched a city unlike any human had ever imagined, a cascade of spires that reflected light like prisms, connected by bridges that hovered mid-air without visible support. The architecture seemed alive, as if the entire city breathed in perfect harmony. Lyra drew a deep breath. The Xenarchs had a language of grandeur, and the city itself spoke it fluently. A soft chime announced their arrival. Lyra turned to the other humans in the delegation. They were dressed in formal attire, simple by Xenarch standards, yet elegant enough to command respect. All eyes followed her as she stepped into the docking bay, her posture calm but confident. She could feel the weight of thousands of expectations pressing against her, but she carried none of the fear. She was ready. The chamber beyond the docking bay was vast, adorned with symbols that pulsed faintly in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Lyra's steps echoed lightly on the polished floor as she approached the great doors. There, at the far end, she saw the figure who had been the subject of countless studies, the ruler whose mind was said to be sharper than any blade. Empress Kalara rose from her throne, a figure of quiet authority. Her gaze was steady, calculating, unflinching. Lyra felt the weight of it and did not look away. The first moments were silence, broken only by the faint hum of the room. Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but clear.
"Your Majesty, it is an honor to meet you." She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of respect that was both human and diplomatic. The Empress tilted her head, studying Lyra as one might examine a work of art or a rare crystal. There was no immediate reply, and Lyra held her stance, waiting patiently. Then the Empress spoke, her voice smooth and deliberate. "Human. You carry the presence of one who knows herself." The words were simple, yet they held a depth that made Lyra pause. She had trained for diplomacy, for negotiation, but she had not expected to encounter observation so piercing, so personal. Lyra smiled gently. "I have been trained to serve, but I am also curious. Your world, your empire, it is beyond what humans imagined. I hope to learn, even in a small way, what it means to live as you do." Kalara's eyes softened just slightly, and for a brief moment, Lyra thought she saw something more than the usual calm composure, something almost like wonder. It vanished quickly, replaced by the poised stillness of command, but the faint trace remained. The Empress rose from her throne, her movements graceful and precise. She descended the platform, each step measured. Lyra noticed that despite centuries of life, the Empress carried herself with elegance, as if every motion were a carefully practiced statement. When she stopped before Lyra, the human felt a sudden pulse of energy, not hostile, not threatening, but intense. The room seemed to shrink around them, the grand hall fading into a space defined only by their presence. "You are beautiful," Lyra said, before she could stop herself. It was not flattery, not even conscious diplomacy. It was an observation born of truth.
Her eyes met Kaelara's without hesitation, not just in form, but in presence, in the way you hold yourself, the way you command without raising your voice. It is rare.
The Empress froze, a subtle tremor passing through her hands.
No human had ever spoken to her like this, not in centuries, not with honesty, not with clarity. She felt a strange warmth rise inside her chest, a flutter she had long forgotten, a feeling that scared her as much as it intrigued her. She whispered, almost to herself, "No one ever told me that." She had not meant to unsettle her, yet she realized she had. But in that moment, she understood something profound. The strength of humans lay not in weapons, not in technology, but in their capacity to see and speak truth, to recognize value in ways that logic alone could not measure. A servant appeared, bowing lightly, offering refreshments. Lyra and Kaelara ignored it for the moment, the connection between them too important to break. The room's usual echoes of protocol felt diminished, replaced by a quiet curiosity. Lyra's presence, her very humanity, had become a mirror reflecting something the Empress had never acknowledged about herself. As the formal introductions continued, Lyra began to notice the reactions of the court. Xenarch advisors whispered among themselves, their faces tight with confusion. A human could make the Empress tremble with words alone? It was impossible, yet undeniable. Lyra understood that her task was more delicate than mere diplomacy. It was a challenge to centuries of isolation, a gentle reminder that emotion, curiosity, and respect could move even the most powerful beings. During the ceremonial walk through the throne hall, Lyra observed the city through the high windows. She described the patterns of light, the way the bridges reflected the sun of the distant system, the subtle curves of the architecture that defied gravity yet seemed perfectly balanced. The Empress, usually silent during tours, occasionally nodded, a faint glow of interest in her eyes. She asked questions, not about military strength or political strategy, but about details of human life, how humans appreciated beauty, how they found meaning in fleeting moments. Lyra answered simply, without pretense. She spoke of the sunrise on Earth, the laughter of children, the quiet intimacy of shared meals, the courage in small acts of kindness. She did not diminish the grandeur of the Xenarch Empire, but she offered perspective from a different world. Kaelara listened, absorbing each word as though tasting a flavor she had never known. By the end of the tour, the Empress had begun to relax in a way unseen for centuries. The stiff rigidity of command softened just enough to allow a spark of curiosity, a flicker of joy, a hint of something dangerously close to laughter. Lyra noticed it and smiled inwardly. This was why humans endured, thrived, and mattered. Even a being who had lived for centuries could be reached through honesty, wonder, and respect. When the delegation returned to the chamber for evening reflection, Kaelara paused, watching the stars through the great windows. Lyra stood beside her, silent but present. Neither spoke for a while, yet words were unnecessary. Something profound had shifted, not in politics, not in power, but in understanding. Humanity, through a single presence, had begun to touch an empire in a way no conquest, no treaty could. Finally, the Empress turned to Lyra, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying a mixture of awe and uncertainty. I did not know it could feel like this. To be seen.
To be recognized. Lyra's smile was gentle. It is the strength of being human.
We do not always measure power in force. Sometimes we measure it in attention, in care, in the willingness to see truth.
Kaelara nodded slowly, letting the words settle.
In that quiet chamber, amidst the gleaming symbols of an ancient empire, two beings from different worlds shared a fleeting understanding.
One human, one Empress, connected not through conquest or command, but through something far older and rarer, acknowledgement of beauty, both external and internal, and the courage to speak it aloud. As the night deepened over the throne world, Lyra returned to her quarters with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had not yet achieved her mission, There were many negotiations ahead, many cultural bridges to build, but the first step had been taken. Humanity had been seen, truly seen, and even the most untouchable being in the Empire had trembled at its presence. In that moment, Lyra realized that the journey ahead would not only be about representing her people, but about reminding the universe, and perhaps even the Empress herself, of the enduring power of humanity, the ability to inspire, to awaken, and to connect across time, space, and even the coldest heart of a star empire. And somewhere in the darkness of the throne world, Empress Kaelara whispered again, almost to herself, "No one ever told me that." The next morning, sunlight streamed across the polished floors of the Empress's palace, painting long, golden streaks that danced like liquid fire. Lyra Vance awoke with the memory of last night still vivid. Kaelara's trembling words, her whispered awe, the subtle spark in her eyes. She knew that today would be even more critical. The Empress had been affected by humanity's presence, but influence without care could be fleeting. Lyra had to be patient, gentle, and unwavering. After dressing in her formal attire, Lyra was escorted to the throne hall once more. The halls seemed alive now, as if the walls themselves acknowledged her presence. Servants moved silently, carrying trays of exotic fruits and delicate beverages, and she greeted them all with small smiles, nods, and words of thanks. Humans often underestimated the strength in small courtesies, but Lyra understood their weight. Even the smallest gesture could ripple across an entire culture. Kaelara awaited her at the far end of the hall, standing before the great window that overlooked the city. The Empress's expression was calm, yet Lyra sensed the undercurrent of curiosity still simmering beneath the surface. It was as if Kaelara were a grand, polished statue, and the human had begun the slow process of melting the ice beneath the stone. "You are punctual," aside Kaelara observed, her tone even but not without a trace of warmth. Lyra inclined her head slightly.
"I value time, Your Majesty, but I also value the moments in which we can observe, learn, and understand." She gestured lightly to the city beyond the window. "Your world is extraordinary. I can see why the Xenarchs hold it in such reverence." The Empress tilted her head, her gaze sweeping over the spires, the hovering bridges, the intricate patterns of light that shifted with the passing sun.
"And yet, you do not speak of power or wealth," Kaelara said, her voice carrying curiosity.
"You focus on observation, appreciation. Why?" Lyra smiled softly. "Because those are the things that endure. Strength alone is fleeting. Power alone can be taken, but the ability to see, to feel, to understand, that is the human advantage. That is how we survive, how we thrive." Kaelara considered her words carefully. Few had ever spoken so plainly, so directly, without fear or subservience. She found herself leaning slightly closer, as if proximity would allow her to catch the meaning more fully. The faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of her lips, a flicker that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "Very well," the Empress said finally. "We shall begin your introduction to the council." The council chamber was vast, filled with figures of authority, each adorned in robes that shimmered with colors not found on any human world. The Xenarch spoke in quiet, deliberate tones, each word measured for impact, each motion precise. Lyra noticed the tension as she entered. Whispers followed her, eyes narrowing, unsure what to make of this human who walked with confidence yet radiated calm. She bowed lightly to the gathered council members. "Greetings. I am Lyra Vance, envoy of humanity. I am here to learn, to share, and to find ways in which our worlds might understand each other." The council members murmured among themselves, some clearly skeptical. A tall Xenarch named Veyrin stepped forward, his voice sharp and precise. "You speak of understanding, yet you are unarmed, unshielded, and vulnerable in our presence. Why should we trust humans? Because trust is not given based on fear, but based on actions. You will see that humans value honesty, curiosity, and compassion.
That is how we prove ourselves. A ripple ran through the chamber.
No human had ever dared speak in such a way before. Many of the council members exchanged looks of disbelief. Kalara, standing at the center, said nothing, but her eyes lingered on Lyra longer than any of the others.
Over the course of the day, Lyra participated in discussions about trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. She listened carefully, asking questions that others might have considered simple or naive, but that revealed subtle truths hidden within the Empire's rigid structure. She asked about art, about storytelling, about the way Xenarchs celebrated moments of significance. She inquired about laughter, and the council members paused, uncertain how to answer. Lyra smiled gently. Even in great empires, moments of joy are precious. They remind us why we govern, why we live, why we strive. Kaialara observed silently as Lyra spoke, her mind slowly expanding to accommodate ideas she had never considered. Could an empire built on centuries of logic and discipline embrace joy? Could it accept the human perspective that strength was not only measured in conquest, but in understanding, kindness, and courage? By the afternoon, Lyra was invited to witness a demonstration of Xenarch technology. The council displayed devices that manipulated gravity, constructs that hovered and shifted at will, and energy fields that glimmered like liquid crystal. Lyra watched, fascinated, asking insightful questions that revealed not only her intelligence but her deep empathy. "You see patterns others do not," Kaialara remarked quietly as she joined Lyra during the demonstration.
You notice what we...
Lyra turned to her. It is not only observation.
It is appreciation. When you notice beauty, even in what seems ordinary, you strengthen your connection to the world and to others. That is something humans understand deeply. Kaialara's lips parted slightly. She was silent for a long moment, absorbing the meaning. "No one has ever spoken to me in this way," she whispered.
No one has ever told me these things.
Lyra smiled softly.
Perhaps now someone has.
The evening brought a formal dinner with the council and the Empress. Lyra found herself seated near Kaialara, the center of attention, yet treated with an unexpected respect. The food was unlike anything she had ever tasted. Delicate, complex, yet balanced in ways that mirrored the Empire itself. As they ate, Kaialara asked her questions about Earth, about human customs, about the ways in which people celebrated life. Lyra answered with stories of sunsets over mountains, the laughter of children, the quiet contentment of shared moments between friends and family. The Xenarchs listened with polite attention, but Kailara's gaze remained fixed on Lyra, her eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity, wonder, and something deeper, something she could not name. As the meal concluded, the Empress rose, her movements graceful yet hesitant. She approached Lyra and extended a hand, a gesture almost unthinkable in Xenarch tradition. "You have shifted something within this hall today," Kaialara said softly. "You remind us that even in a vast empire there is space for understanding, for connection, for emotion."
Lyra took the hand, bowing slightly. That is the human way.
We thrive not only by strength but by empathy, courage, and honesty. We honor those who hold their worlds with care. For a moment, Kaialara simply looked at her, the weight of centuries pressing against the new possibilities that Lyra represented. Then she spoke, almost a whisper, yet carrying the power of an entire empire. "No one ever told me that." The council members, witnessing this exchange, felt a subtle shift in the air. Something had changed in the Empress, something that even the most experienced Xenarchs could not define. The human had brought a new kind of energy, a new way of thinking that was not based on fear, control, or logic alone. It was the strength of connection, the courage to be sincere, and the ability to inspire awe without force. Later that night, Lyra returned to her quarters. She felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The day had been long, yet every moment had reinforced why humans mattered. not because of their weapons, not because of technology, but because of their spirit. Even the most powerful beings in the universe could be moved by kindness, truth, and genuine admiration. She thought of the Empress, alone in her quarters, grappling with emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. Lyra smiled. Change was not sudden nor easy, but it had begun. Humanity had planted a seed of understanding, and with time, that seed could grow into something far greater than any empire had ever known. And somewhere in the silent expanse of the throne world, Kalara's whispered words lingered like a soft echo. No one ever told me that. The morning light spilled across the palace once more, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The previous days had brought subtle changes. Empress Kalara's eyes lingered longer on the world outside her windows. Her gestures softened, and whispers of curiosity replaced whispers of protocol among the council. Yet beneath the calm, there was tension. A situation had arisen on the outer systems of the Xenarch Empire, an unexpected dispute over a resource-rich star cluster. Neighboring alien coalitions had begun to push against the Empire's borders, and Xenarch generals, known for their precision and logic, were calling for swift action. Lyra Vance arrived at the council chamber, her steps steady despite the palpable tension in the air. She had spent the past 2 days observing the Empress, learning the subtleties of her court, and understanding the intricate balance of power within the Empire. Today she knew her role would expand beyond observation. She would need to act, to offer guidance in a way that honored human principles while respecting Xenarch authority. The council gathered quickly, their robes shimmering under the soft lights of the chamber. Xenarch generals took their places at the front, speaking in measured tones about the outer system. Their strategy was clear: deploy fleets, assert dominance, and demonstrate strength. "The humans will understand," one general said, glancing at Lyra with faint skepticism. "They cannot expect us to negotiate with weakness." Lyra's gaze met the Empress's, and she saw the subtle hesitation there, the question that had been growing in Kalara's mind since their first meeting. Is strength only in force, or is there another way? Lyra inhaled deeply. "Your Majesty, Council members, I understand the urgency of the situation, but perhaps there is another approach. Humanity has faced disputes throughout its history, and we have learned that listening, understanding, and offering solutions can achieve what weapons often cannot." A murmur ran through the council. One of the generals, a stern Xenarch named Vylon, frowned sharply. "And what do humans know of interstellar diplomacy?" "You suggest negotiation with those who would seize our territory without hesitation?"
Lyra smiled calmly. "Negotiation does not mean submission."
"It means understanding intentions, finding common ground, and presenting solutions that allow all parties to save face and preserve stability. Strength is in patience, clarity, and the courage to act without violence." Kalara's eyes studied Lyra intently. There was something compelling about her presence, something beyond words. The Empress finally spoke, her voice deliberate, echoing in the grand chamber. "Lyra Vance, you have shown me what our empire has lacked for centuries: perspective, empathy, the ability to see beyond protocol. We will consider your counsel." The generals exchanged uneasy glances, but Kalara's decision was final. Lyra's plan would be heard. Over the next hours, Lyra worked tirelessly with the council and diplomats. She examined reports of the disputed systems, analyzed communication logs, and proposed a series of initiatives, messages emphasizing shared interests, cultural exchanges, and offers of trade that could satisfy the neighboring coalition without bloodshed. She suggested that Xenarch ambassadors demonstrate goodwill by sharing knowledge and technology that would benefit the coalition's people. Some council members scoffed quietly, unconvinced that such subtlety could replace fleet deployments. But Lyra persisted, speaking in measured, clear sentences that combined logic with human empathy.
"Even a small gesture of understanding can shift perspectives," she explained.
"We cannot rely solely on fleets and weapons to secure trust. The greatest victories are often those where no battle occurs at all.
As the day progressed, Empress Kaelara observed the interactions closely. She was beginning to recognize the power in Lyra's words, the way humans could influence without forcing, how courage could be expressed through creativity and intellect rather than strength.
Kaelara felt a strange sensation: pride, admiration, and a flicker of hope she had long believed impossible. By late afternoon, messages crafted by Lyra were sent to the leaders of the neighboring coalition. She had chosen her words carefully, highlighting shared challenges, mutual benefits, and respect for autonomy. When the responses arrived, she was not surprised to find cautious interest rather than outright hostility. The coalition leaders expressed curiosity, requesting dialogue to explore solutions. It was an outcome no Xenarch general had predicted. Kaelara stood silently, absorbing the implications. For centuries, she had relied on dominance and control to maintain the Empire's stability, and yet a single human had shown her a path that achieved the same objective without force, without fear, without unnecessary suffering. The realization struck her like a quiet thunder. Humanity's strength was not in conquest. It was in vision, empathy, and the courage to act differently. That evening, Kaelara invited Lyra to walk with her across the palace gardens. The gardens were vast, with crystal-clear streams reflecting starlight, trees shaped in ways that defied logic yet radiated harmony, and paths that seemed to flow naturally with the contours of the land. Lyra's presence had softened even the Empress's usually rigid schedule. The two walked slowly, discussing the day's developments and observing the living beauty of the Empire's heart. "You are remarkable," Kaelara said quietly, almost shyly, "not because you command armies or wield technology, but because you inspire hope. Even in the most impossible circumstances, you find a way to make people see differently." "I am not remarkable. Humans are curious, adaptable. We see what is possible, and we try to reach it. You, Your Majesty, already carry the power to shape your empire."
I only remind you of what it can do when paired with care and understanding.
Kaelara paused at a small bridge arching over a tranquil pond. Fish with shimmering scales swam beneath, moving in elegant patterns. She leaned on the railing, her eyes reflecting the colors of the garden. "No one ever told me that," she whispered, her words carrying awe and vulnerability. "No one ever taught me that strength could come from understanding, that power could be gentle." She had seen this moment before, with humans facing challenges far greater than themselves, a leader realizing that courage and empathy were as potent as any weapon. She reached out lightly, not touching, but acknowledging the weight of the realization.
"It is never too late to learn, Your Majesty."
And sometimes, the smallest acts can have the greatest impact. In the following days, Lyra's influence began to ripple across the Empire. Xenarch nobles and council members who had been skeptical found themselves quietly reconsidering their assumptions. They observed Kaelara taking risks, not in battle, but in dialogue and negotiation. They saw her expressing subtle forms of empathy, asking questions she had never asked before, and acknowledging perspectives she had once dismissed. Lyra continued her work, balancing human diplomacy with cultural sensitivity. She shared stories of Earth, of communities working together, of people overcoming fear through cooperation, of ordinary humans achieving extraordinary results by embracing empathy and patience. The Xenarchs, initially skeptical, began to listen, intrigued by the simplicity and effectiveness of her ideas. Then came the crucial moment. Representatives of the neighboring coalition arrived in the Xenarch Empire, ready for talks. Lyra accompanied Kaelara to the Grand Hall, where leaders from multiple star systems gathered. The air was thick with tension. Centuries of mistrust could not be dissolved with a single gesture, yet Lyra's calm presence provided an anchor. She stepped forward and addressed the assembly. "We all share a universe filled with wonder, challenges, and opportunity. Conflict may seem inevitable, but understanding and dialogue can reveal solutions that honor everyone. Strength is not only in force, it is in patience, in listening, and in finding paths that benefit all. The leaders exchanged glances, their rigid postures softening slightly. Kalara added her voice, steady but warm. We have the choice to act with wisdom, to embrace cooperation rather than conflict. Let us see what is possible when we choose understanding over domination. Hours passed as discussions unfolded. Lyra facilitated conversations, offering clarity, suggesting compromises, and reminding all parties of shared goals. By nightfall, a preliminary agreement was reached, a framework for trade, resource sharing, and cultural exchange that satisfied the coalition without loss of territory or dignity. The room erupted in quiet murmurs of relief and cautious optimism. Kailara turned to Lyra, her face radiant with an expression she had never worn publicly: gratitude and admiration. "You have shown me what I could not see alone," she said softly. "No one ever told me that strength could exist without destruction. No one ever showed me that courage could be gentle." Lyra bowed her head slightly.
"It is the human way, Your Majesty, and I believe it can be the Xenarch way as well, if you choose it."
That night, as the stars shimmered across the Empire's vast sky, Kalara reflected on the transformation she had begun to feel. She had always ruled with precision, with control, with unyielding authority. Yet now, a new dimension had entered her life. A recognition that connection, understanding, and care could shape history as profoundly as fleets or weapons ever could. Lyra, in her quarters, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had not conquered an empire, nor had she faced battle or bloodshed. Yet humanity had proven itself once more, showing that insight, empathy, and courage could move even the most ancient and disciplined beings. The ripple of her presence had begun, and when Kalara smiled quietly to herself, the faintest hint of laughter in her eyes, Lyra knew that change had taken root. Somewhere in the silence of the vast Xenarch Empire, the Empress whispered once more, almost as if repeating a sacred mantra, "No one ever told me that." And in that simple statement, the truth of humanity's enduring strength shone brighter than any star. The courage to act with care, to inspire without force, and to awaken hearts that had long been untouched. The morning light spilled across the throne world once more, gentle and persistent, as if the universe itself acknowledged the subtle changes taking place. Empress Kalara walked slowly through the palace corridors, her robes trailing silently across the polished floor. She had spent the past weeks observing, listening, and reflecting on the presence of Lyra Vance. Each day had brought revelations she could not ignore, truths about her empire, her people, and herself that had long remained hidden beneath centuries of tradition and authority. Lyra waited for her in the gardens, the crystalline streams catching the sunlight and scattering it across the trees in sparkling patterns. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the palace, yet each visit felt new, full of opportunities to learn and to inspire. Kalara approached, and for the first time in decades she did not appear as an untouchable figure of perfection. She seemed alive in a way that was both humbling and astonishing.
"You have changed much in a short time," Kalara said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself.
"I am not sure the council or even my own advisors understand what has happened, but I feel it." Lyra smiled gently. "You have always carried the capacity to feel, to connect. I only reminded you of what you had forgotten." The Empress looked out across the gardens, watching the streams and the gentle movements of the hovering plants. She had begun to notice the beauty in small details, the sway of a branch, the iridescent patterns on the fish beneath the bridges, the subtle play of light and shadow. For centuries she had overlooked such things, focused only on perfection, control, and strategy. Now she felt a kind of freedom she had never known. Kalara's steps led them to the council chamber, where representatives from across the empire had gathered. The atmosphere was different from before, less rigid, less tense.
Even the generals, known for their strict adherence to protocol, seemed intrigued by the subtle shift in the air. They watched Kailara with cautious curiosity, waiting to see how she would act after weeks of human influence. Lyra remained at her side, a steady presence, ready to guide if needed. Today, Kailara would make her first public declaration of the change taking place within the Empire. She had spent centuries enforcing rules and suppressing emotion, but now she felt confident that she could embrace both authority and empathy. Standing at the podium, Kailara addressed the assembly. For centuries, the Xenarch Empire has relied on strength, logic, and order to guide its people. These qualities have served us well. But in the presence of a human visitor, we have learned something equally important: connection, understanding, and the courage to act with care. These qualities do not weaken us, they strengthen us. The room remained silent, every eye fixed on the Empress. Even the most skeptical council members could sense the sincerity in her voice. Lyra Vance has reminded us that true strength is not measured solely in fleets or technology, but in the willingness to listen, to empathize, and to inspire, Kailara continued. We will embrace these principles, not as a replacement for order, but as a complement to it. Our empire can be vast and disciplined, yet also compassionate and wise. Whispers spread through the assembly. Some were shocked, others intrigued, but all recognized the truth in her words. The influence of a single human had begun to reshape the Empire's approach, not through force or fear, but through example, insight, and honesty. Later that day, Kailara and Lyra walked to the outer terraces where the sky stretched endlessly across the horizon, dotted with distant stars. The Empire's fleets glimmered in orbit, powerful yet dormant, a reminder of the might that had built the Xenarch civilization. Lyra glanced at the vessels and then back at the Empress. You have a choice, Your Majesty, Lyra said softly. You can lead with force, as your ancestors have, or you can lead with wisdom, compassion, and understanding. Either path requires courage. The difference is in the kind of legacy you leave. Kailara considered the words, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against her shoulders. She had always equated leadership with control, believing that authority required fear, precision, and discipline. Yet now she understood that true authority could inspire, that strength could coexist with kindness, and that courage could be expressed through diplomacy as much as through strategy. A message arrived from the neighboring coalition, the same group that had tested the Empire's patience weeks ago. They requested further dialogue, seeking cultural exchange, trade, and mutual understanding. Lyra smiled quietly. The plan she had proposed weeks earlier had borne fruit. Conflict had been avoided, not by fleets or weapons, but by insight, patience, and empathy. Kailara read the message aloud to Lyra. They trust us. They are willing to work with us. She paused, the faintest smile forming on her lips. No one ever told me that strength could be this.
Lyra reached out and lightly touched Kailara's arm, a gesture of reassurance and solidarity. It has always been there, Your Majesty.
You only needed to see it through a different lens. That evening, a grand assembly was held in the heart of the Empire. Delegates from distant star systems gathered to witness a new era of leadership. Kailara stood at the center, her presence commanding yet approachable. She spoke of unity, empathy, and cooperation, emphasizing that the Empire's greatest asset was not its fleets, not its technology, but its people, the capacity to act with wisdom, kindness, and courage. Many had expected a rigid display of authority, yet they found themselves inspired by Kailara's sincerity, by the human influence that had shaped her approach. They saw that strength need not be harsh, that power could be balanced with compassion, and that an empire could thrive not only through control, but through connection. Lyra observed from a corner of the assembly, quietly proud. Her mission was not to conquer or dominate, but to illuminate a path that humans had known for generations. She had reminded the Empress, and through her the entire Empire, that courage and wisdom were often found in the willingness to care, to see, and to act with intention. As the assembly concluded, Kalera approached Lyra privately.
You have changed me, she said softly.
No one ever told me that strength could exist in tenderness. No one ever showed me that courage could be gentle.
Thank you. Lyra bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect and humility. It is the human way, Your Majesty.
And it is also your way, now. You have only to embrace it. In the following weeks, the Empire began to transform. Council members adopted new approaches to diplomacy, blending logic with empathy. Xenarch nobles experimented with cultural exchanges and trade agreements that honored both tradition and innovation. Even the generals, initially skeptical, began to recognize the effectiveness of collaboration over conflict. Kailara herself embraced a more open leadership style. She held dialogues with citizens, listened to their concerns, and encouraged creativity and innovation. Her decisions reflected both strategic wisdom and human-inspired empathy. The Empire's strength endured, yet it now carried a new dimension, a softness intertwined with resilience, a courage balanced with care. One evening, Kailara and Lyra walked once more through the gardens. The streams reflected starlight, the trees swayed gently, and the air was filled with the faint hum of the living palace. Kailara paused, watching the movements of the plants and the subtle interplay of light and shadow.
You have taught me much,
she said quietly.
I ruled for centuries without knowing this, without realizing that leadership could be gentle, that strength could inspire rather than intimidate. No one ever told me that.
Sometimes it takes someone from outside to remind us of what we already carry within. Humanity does not seek to conquer. We seek to illuminate.
And you have chosen to see.
Kailara turned to Lyra, a genuine smile spreading across her face. For the first time in decades, she laughed, a sound soft, melodic, and entirely new. The laughter carried through the gardens, blending with the hum of life around them. It was a sound of freedom, of understanding, of awakening. The Empress and the human stood together, two beings from different worlds united not by power or conquest, but by mutual respect, insight, and the courage to embrace change. Across the vast empire, citizens and leaders alike felt the ripple of this transformation.
Humanity had not conquered, it had inspired.
Strength had been redefined, not through weapons or domination, but through wisdom, empathy, and the courage to act with care. And somewhere, in the quiet expanse of the throne world, Empress Kailara whispered once more, almost reverently, "No one ever told me that." In that simple statement lay the enduring truth of humanity's influence, that courage could coexist with compassion, that strength could be gentle, and that even the most ancient and disciplined empire could be transformed by the touch of a single human heart. Lyra watched the stars above, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She had not wielded fleets, nor had she commanded armies, yet her presence had sparked a revolution of understanding, a new way of leading and living that would ripple through the Xenarch Empire for generations. Humanity had proven itself again, not through force, but through insight, empathy, and courage. As night fell and the throne world glimmered under the soft light of distant suns, Kaela returned to her quarters, her mind alive with possibilities. She had begun a journey that would shape not only her own future, but the future of her people. Humanity had reminded her of something timeless and profound, that the greatest strength lies not in domination, but in the courage to see, to care, and to act with wisdom. And in that quiet, transformative moment, the universe seemed to pause, acknowledging that even in the vastness of space, a single human could inspire change that no fleet or weapon ever could.